Looky here, Jack Symington is in the meeting. Rob's here. There's Rob. All right, hey, we're live, so we're gonna go ahead and get started. The phone number on the screen is Steve Nelson, the fund manager, and I may be pronouncing his title wrong for the Left Two Fund. But before we do that, I want to get started by announcing a few people. We have President Monteblanco on here. We have Brian Banner. We have our national trustee, Jack Symington. We have Lodge 10 president, and on the legislative committee, Rob Lehman. And it looks like we have a new one. Daniel, where are you from, buddy?
Spokane PD with Holt.
Okay. So we have a new attendee today from Spokane PD and one of our members over there. And just joining is Jeff Anaya from Lodge 12 and Leah, our business manager. So with that, Mr. Nelson, feel free to kick us off.
Okay. I was asked to give a brief update on Left 2 stuff and then to talk about one bill in particular. The Left 2 board did not recommend any legislation this session. The board is, the main project I would say that the board is working on has to do with the benefit improvement account. There was a substantial transfer to that, and the board was working last interim to get pricing on some frequently requested benefit improvements. And out on the front page of the board's website, which is left.wa.gov, there is now a benefit improvement account information center. And so you can go there, and we're going to try to keep a kind of an updated balance of how much is in the benefit improvement account, and organize or put all the pricing information in one place, what's been priced, so that there's one place that you can go to which answers most of the questions. This session then actually took an interesting turn when the Senate Republicans introduced their budget a couple weeks ago. There was a bill in there that would merge the Left 1 and Teachers 1 retirement systems. And separate and apart from that merger, the point of that merger is Left 1 has a surplus in their fund, Teachers 1 has a deficit in their fund. The newly merged plan would be fully funded, and so it would free the state up from obligations to pay in to making the Teachers 1 account fully funded. So it would save the state a substantial amount of money over the next 4 years. It would also save school district employers some money. But separate and apart from the merger piece, which was the budget piece, they added in a benefit improvement for Left 2 to the bill. That benefit improvement would be paid for entirely out of Left 2, so it has nothing to do with the finances of Left 1 or TERS 1. The benefit improvement would be partially paid for by the amount of money that's in the benefit improvement account, but that was not going to be enough, not even half enough to pay for it. So in addition to that, it was some of the reserve assets that are currently in the Left Plan 2 account would be used to finish paying off the cost of that benefit improvement. The bill hasn't got a hearing, and it was, from what I've been able to learn so far right now, one of the questions was it going to potentially then show up in the Senate Democratic budget as well? And right now, the expectation is that the Senate Democratic budget won't be out until right around the March revenue forecast which isn't for another week, March 17th.
Yep.
And then I do not expect to see this bill or merger in the Senate Democratic budget when it's released. It doesn't seem that it was a part of their budget plans during the interim, and I don't think that they felt like there was a need to change their budget plans based on this bill. That being said, it has certainly got a lot of attention. And as the budget moves through the legislative process, if it runs into any kind of snags, maybe, and they need a plan B, I think this is now something that is in play. At the very least, the benefit improvement that was in the bill is something that will be priced by the actuary. It's something that the board can study. It gives a kind of a concrete proposal for a specific benefit improvement that hasn't been out there yet in the benefit improvement account discussions. The benefit improvement in the bill, just briefly, would provide a $20,000 lump sum check to all retirees, Jack. And then it would also increase the multiplier for all current left two members so that when they retire, instead of getting 2% a year for years 15 through 25, they would get 2.5% a year. So right now, the multiplier for left two is 2% per year. If you retired with 25 years, you'd get 50% of your final average salary. This would bump it up to 55% of your final average salary. So a significant improvement for all of the active members in the plan. Now, that being said, I would be happy to answer any questions about the left board's agenda or anything to do with topics that the left board is working on, or questions about that bill, as much as I know. So I understand your question.
So this is Michael.
Yeah.
Let's just to kind of tie all that together, what Steve had said. Remember, so the Democrats, just kind of high level, Democrats that both on the Senate and the House side probably do not have this left two merger, left one, left TERS one, left two benefit merger proposal in their budgets. Not likely, as Steve mentioned, to come forward in a Democratic budget. And part of that is as you all know, merging out of the left one fund comes with it quite a bit of controversy politically for folks. So I'm with Steve. I don't anticipate this being presented in a Democratic budget. They have a lot of other tax proposals out there to help fund their budgets, everything from taxes on cell phones and taxes on pop syrup, taxes on health plans to fund several things. So what I would say is unless some of those assumed budget proposals on the D side get lost in the shuffle, I don't expect this left one, TERS one bill to move ahead. The other thing I'll mention is Steve mentioned the benefit improvement account. Recall that account was created many years ago and was not, that bill was not followed by the legislature year after year, which required extraordinary revenues of the state to be put into the benefit improvement account. And then 2 years ago, the state put in about $350 million, as I recall, into that account to start the benefit improvement account fund. And then this proposal adds to that, I think about $600 million, which gets you to about $900 million, which helps fund that extended benefit that Steve talked about that's in that bill. So just a few more details on that at kind of a high level, but I'm with Steve. I think the chances of that bill moving forward this session are are slim, but it's certainly something that we need to, have in our rear view mirrors. We're going through session just to make certain that something weird doesn't happen, and that bill comes in play from the Democratic side. So with that, I'll start talking. Stop talking. James, any questions for Steve on the chat or via text?
Nothing yet. So if anybody here in the room has something for him, raise your hand and I'll let you talk. Looks like nothing, Michael.
Okay. So with that,
Okay, there were
Steve,
some-
go ahead.
I was going to say, if you guys have questions, if something comes up later, just send them to Michael or to James, and I'll get those answered separately.
Sweet.
Thank you, sir, for taking some time out of your Saturday. We really appreciate it. We've got about, looks like 100 or so people tuned in. So good information. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it, Steve.
Bye,
Thank you
guys.
so much.
All right, Michael, you're up. Take us away.
All right.
Hey, wait a minute. Before we get, I want to recognize our state chaplain came into the call, and then another member of our legislative committee. So our state chaplain, Chad Peterschreck's here, and Holt from the Spokane Lodge is here as well. He's on our legislative committee. And then we have a number, 509-438-1232 that's joined. So I don't know who that is. If you just want to slide it to in the chat, we'll be all good. Other than that, take her away, Michael.
All right. So we are now in past our halfway point in the legislative session. As we've talked about on all these calls, we are now past the opposite house cutoff, which means Senate bills are being heard on the House side and House bills are being heard on the Senate side from a policy committee perspective. That cutoff, so opposite house policy committee cutoff happens on Friday the 26th. So a couple of Fridays from yesterday. And in the meantime, both policy committees on both sides of the rotunda will be hearing policy bills from the other side. And I'm going to talk about public hearings and executive sessions that are scheduled, that happened this week and that are scheduled for next week. And then the next cutoff that comes after that is the fiscal cutoff, and that's April 2nd. As Steve Nelson alluded to, new revenue forecast for the state budget from the Economic and Revenue Forecast Council comes out next week, which is Wednesday. And that will be, that is an estimation of all the state revenues, all the caseload forecasts. So number of students in classes, number of people in jail. It's just a very large kind of look at all of the things that impact state revenues. And then once I think that's Wednesday of next week, once that day comes and goes, I think within about 10 or so days, give or take, you will see the Democratic budgets come out from both the House and the Senate. And then all of the all the fiscal bills need to be passed out of the fiscal committees by April 2nd. Then what's called the opposite house cutoff happens on April 11th. And then that leaves exactly 2 weeks for the House and the Senate between April 11th and April 25th to do concurrences, hear all fiscal bills, all budgets, and disputes between the bodies for looking at sine die, on the 25th of April. So that's kind of just kind of a roadmap as to where we're going overall. For the next month or so, give or take. So I will say that, and James and I talked about this over text. So believe it or not, on the original House cutoff, there's usually a bill on both bodies that happens at 5 o'clock, and that usually takes long debate. to happen. So interestingly, on the House side, they did not have a 5 o'clock bill. And further interestingly, the House left about 20 bills on their, excuse me, on their calendar to expire. So 20 bills, along with a couple I'm going to talk about in a little bit, died because they weren't passed out by the body in time. So overall, the House has passed about 200 of the 747 bills that were introduced on the House side. And on the Senate side, they passed 208 of the 695 bills that were introduced. So that kind of gives you a sense as to about kind of generally, while the overall number of bills has passed, about 25% of the bills that get introduced every session pass. So, or keep moving along and through the process. So just kind of at a really high level, we're introducing, there has been introduced this session about half the number of bills as normal. And then out of that, again, about 20% of give or take of the ones that are introduced make it through the process to this point. So just kind of a high level overall view of the legislative kind of status where we are, just in terms of number of bills that are moving along. So I'm going to scoot right into the agenda and talk about, and James, I don't have, because I'm remote today, I don't have the agenda in front of me. I've just kind of taken some notes. So if I misstep or if I skip one, will you please kind of tug at me or holler at me, and I'll make certain I get to it. So most importantly, I think, speaking of bills that were left on the calendar, House Bill 1202, which is the civil liability or the civil cause of action bill, that bill was left on the calendar. You all probably know that we were in support of that legislation for the reasons we've talked about on previous calls, the protections that there is in there for peace officers, the requirements that are in there for local agencies to be on the hook for officers' conduct. That bill was very hotly debated in the House Democratic Caucus. The cities and the counties and the management side pushed really, really hard not to have that bill adopted. It was a significant fiscal impact, albeit a crystal ball fiscal impact for local agencies on the likelihood of what that civil liability bill would have costed them. So at the end of the day, House Bill 1202 did not make it through the original House cutoff, and for all intents and purposes is dead for the session. And remember, when I always say dead for the session, but unless that bill becomes necessary to implement one of the Democratic budgets that comes out here in the next few weeks, that bill is going to be dead for the session. My fear a little bit on that bill not getting adopted this session is that it's going to be front and center for next session. The bill's in a place right now where we actually think it's okay to move along. What that's going to do is give the cities and the counties and the agencies about 7 months or 6 months to work the bill with legislators. So that bill is going to be one that is going to be front and center next session. So stay tuned for the 2022 session for that bill to move forward. Also, another bill that did not make it through cutoff is House Bill 1203. And that was the Community Oversight Board's bill. And remember, we were opposed to that legislation mainly because of the breadth of that bill. While we just didn't disagree with having community oversight boards engaged in policy discussions and such at the local level, remember that bill gave community oversight boards subpoena power, investigatory power, complaint power, and hiring and firing of police chiefs and sheriffs power. So all of the law enforcement groups, us included, were opposed to that legislation in its current form. But again, that's something we don't have to worry about this session. But again, something that we're going to have front and center again next session. So We're going to have to do our work over the interim on both of those bills to make certain legislators understand our point of view from the Fraternal Order of Police's standpoint over this coming interim, because those bills are going to be back next year for sure. James, want to add anything on 1202 or 1203 before I move along?
I just want to add that, working with the sponsor of 1202, Representative Ty, she was very good to work with, and I hope that those lines of communication stay open as we move past this session and into the next session, because I agree with you. We will see that bill again. And the same for 1203. I think there's some things that we could do in the off season to maybe work that in a way that it doesn't dramatically affect our working environment.
Fair enough. All right, I'm going to move down to the tactics bill, House Bill 1054. I'm going to assume you all have been on all these calls before. So that's the bill that relates to chokeholds, LVNRs, tear gas, vehicular pursuits, no-knock warrants, and clearly identification of peace officers. That is a bill that we are at a comfortable place with that piece of legislation. We think it has been, I'm just going to say it worked to death. The bill is still moving along, so it's not dead, but we have spent a considerable amount of time getting that bill to a place where it is, doesn't have everything we want in it, but it's palatable, for lack of a better way of putting it. WASPIC and WACOPS are continuing, and some other agencies are continuing to want to sharpen that bill up a little bit more. In terms of vehicular pursuits and in terms of use of deadly force on LVNRs and chokeholds. We're fine with those amendments if somebody can get it done, if somebody can get them done. But for us, we think that bill is in a good spot. We've worked really hard with the prime, worked really diligently with the prime sponsor to get that bill to a place where we could accept it. We're working just a little bit more on the vehicular pursuit policy piece to see if we can sharpen that up a little bit with the prime sponsor. But other than that, that bill had a public hearing this past week on the 11th in the Senate Law and Justice Committee, and it's scheduled for executive session next week on the 18th. So at our call next Saturday, we'll know whether or not that bill moves on the 18th. If it doesn't move on the 18th out of committee, remember there is the following week for bills to move as well. But the Senate Law and Justice Committee Chair, Senator Peterson, in my estimation, runs one of the best committees just in terms of how he spaces out bills for hearing for executive action. And while he's got several of the law enforcement bills in his committee, he's got a number of other bills that relate to law and justice. So I fully expect that bill to move out on the 18th. And again, we continue to work with the prime sponsor on one little tweak. Others are working on some other tweaks. And I expect that bill will move along next week. James, you want to say anything else on the tactics bill?
Yeah, I just want to thank Marco for his testimony. I thought it was very powerful. We got a lot of positive feedback on it, so much appreciated. Marco, as always, did a hell of a job testifying and representing the organization in a professional manner.
And more importantly, thank you to Marco's father for being on there. Marco, you did a great job, but having your dad, in the background was just, it really touched me, and I hope other people kind of noticed that as well.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah. All right, the next bill, James has got two bills for decertification, 5051 and 1082. 1082 is dead and stayed in the House, and 5051 is the decert or police accountability bill. That bill was heard this past week. before the Senate Law and Justice Committee. We testified as other, or the House, I'm sorry, the House Public Safety Committee. We testified as other on that bill. Other law enforcement groups testified the same way. Both WASPIC and WACOPS testified in opposition. And we're going to continue, and we have some meetings set up next week. We're going to continue to try to work. We're going to continue to work with Chair Goodman on that bill. I think my impression is that folks on the House side understand that bill needs a little bit more work. Remember, this was the bill that had 40 amendments on it on the Senate floor. Out of those 40 amendments, one, maybe two were adopted, and they were both Democratic amendments. All the rest were Republican amendments, and all were defeated. Excuse me. So we're going to continue to work with Chair Goodman. He's indicated a willingness to pull us in and see if there are some changes that we can make to that legislation. And again, make it better for us moving forward. Testifying other, I think, was a good way to indicate from our standpoint our willingness to work with the prime sponsor and the chair to make this bill better. And that will bring itself to fruition, I think, next week. That bill is also scheduled for executive session in public safety on the 18th, which is next week. I don't feel that bill is going to be ready to move out on the 18th, just because of the level and the amount of negotiations I think that are going to occur between the public hearing, which was day before yesterday, and the 18th, but we'll see how we go. So next Saturday, we'll know whether or not that bill is continued to be worked on, or whether or not they've decided to move that bill out to the Appropriations Committee for further action. So James, you want to talk about any details on the CERT-DCERT bill that I didn't get to?
Yeah, we originally were going to oppose the bill, but Michael and I had some very productive meetings and conversations about this bill this week. And that changed us to go to other because we feel there is some common ground. And this is one of those bills that actually are one of our strong suits, is having conversations with the community groups and other stakeholders about finding some common ground. And so that's one of the reasons we moved from opposing it to other, because we feel there is some good dialogue that is happening, and we feel we can get this to a good place and where we all could come together on.
Yep. Thanks so much. All right. The next bill I'm going to talk about is 5066, and that's the peace officer duty to intervene. It had a public hearing also last week. We testified in favor of that legislation with a couple of caveats. We noted that there's a word in there about in one of the sections about an officer viewing another peace officer as attempting to use force that isn't authorized by policy or practice of the agency. We asked them to think about sharpening their pencils on the word attempting. I understand, and I know Alan's on the line. Attempting is defined all throughout the criminal code and through common law. And so it'll be interesting to see if they take the time to define attempting in the bill, or whether or not they'll just leave it up to the way the courts have defined attempting. We also asked them to think about the words witnesses and observes. In the bill, they use both of those words in terms of the observing officer or the witnessing officer. And the lawyer in me just couldn't resist asking them to, we assume that they mean the same thing, but the courts will look at those words as meaning something different. So I basically asked if they intend them to mean the same, then maybe use the same word. If you intend them to mean something different, then talk to us, and we'll see how those words pan out. So that said, we also talked in that bill about the non-retaliation piece of that legislation in section 1 sub 3. And that's a section that says that your management, that the law enforcement agencies cannot, if somebody reports to somebody in the agency on another officer's conduct, that they cannot use that as retaliation to the officer. So we testified that that is a provision that is something that we very much support, and something that we need to make certain that it stays in that bill as it moves forward. Again, that's something that not being able to be retaliated against for reporting misconduct of another peace officer is something that we think needs to stay in the bill should it move forward. And finally, on that bill, there's a section in there that requires the Criminal Justice Training Commission to make recommendations on model policies on the duty to intervene. And with a lot of these bills, we are asking that the legislature consider sections requiring those bodies, when they do make those model policy recommendations, also to make recommendations to the state legislature on policies or parts of those policies that could be put into state statute, so that it's clearly established minimum standards in state law, so that we don't end up with 39 different counties and 217 different cities coming up with different policies. So in a lot of these pieces of legislation, you'll hear me talk about adding sections like that to the bills, so that the legislature can be put sort of in a place to adopt some statewide policies on this and other pieces of legislation. So James, anything you want to add on duty to intervene?
Sorry, couldn't get the mic working there. I just want to recognize that one of our staff attorneys is on here, Alan Harvey, and Michael and I rely on him and Jim David to kind of give us a quick turnaround on some of the analysis of some of the language, from a trial attorney perspective. And those are the two attorneys that defend us out in the field. So they're very helpful, those insights. We don't always agree, or we can't always get the language across there. The only other thing about this bill, we testified in favor. So did the Troopers Association. They testified in favor, and I believe state employees testified in favor of this bill as well. There were only, and correct me if I'm wrong, Michael, there were only 2 law enforcement groups testify against this bill.
Yeah, I can't remember if it was against or other, but yeah.
Yeah, well, I think they signed in as other, but their testimony was definitely against.
I think that's fair.
Yeah, and so know this bill, is in a good place as well. And I want to recognize Senator Dingra contacted us early on and asked for our input, and she made changes to the bill, incorporating some of the things that we asked for. So this bill has been moving quite smoothly. I think it's something that every law enforcement officer already does. I like the fact that it's non-disciplinary. They can't take disciplinary action for you. And so it kind of changes the culture and kind of pushes that down. So.
Yeah. And I'll say, I've learned a lot through this process. James and I have talked to a lot of you, and, we've had a few, conversations about folks who, have reported misconduct on people in their departments. And, one person we talked to said they did it once and they did it twice, and they kind of got, tarred and feathered a little bit. And so they decided that they would never do it again. And so having that non-retaliation piece in there is really important. All right, so I'm going to move on to House Bill 1310, which is the duty to intervene. That's the use of force bill. Public hearing is scheduled on that legislation next week in the Senate Law and Justice Committee, and also is scheduled, although it'll be interesting to see if Senator Peterson does it, was also scheduled to move out next week as well on the 18th. We will testify, I think, as other on that piece of legislation. We think it needs just a couple of more tweaks. But remember, this is the bill that had in it, as it was introduced, a changing of the reasonable officer standard that we worked on in 1064 and I-90 and all of those processes. Excuse me. That provision was moved out of the bill. So the current standard that's in legislation today is maintained. There is some use of force language in there still that we'd like to see a couple of tweaks to. But other than that, having Section 6 move out of that bill was huge. I would tell you that on the community group side, as I understand it, that was a very difficult, very difficult and hard discussion in the D caucus to move that language out. So we're very thankful of that, and working with Representative Johnson and other folks on that bill. We just need to massage it a little bit around the edges, and hopefully that'll be in a place that once it moves out of committee with some amendments, we hope it's a place where we can at least be neutral or softly supporting the legislation. So, but we've got to see a couple little tweaks in it before it moves out of committee. James, you want to add anything on use of force?
No, I just want to point out, this is another bill where we've had some really productive conversations over the last week, along with the prime sponsor. We probably will move to other from opposed, depending on what goes on the next couple of days. But again, this is one of those where we're about 3/4 of the way there, and we do appreciate Representative Johnson taking that new use of force standard out. We know how difficult that probably was to go back to the supporters of this bill and explain that, hey, we're going to have to remove that. And so one of the things that we have done is reached out to those supporters directly and expressed our thanks and respect and sympathy.
Yeah. And this is one bill for me that hit home, you know, when particularly on the D side, D majorities in both the House and the Senate. I'll just kind of digress for a second. So on the Senate side, you need to get 4 Democrats to vote with you to basically undo something that the Democratic majority wants to do. On the House side, you have to get 9. So those are really high bars for purposes of changing legislation and moving a caucus. So it's really important to know and understand how this committee process is working, and trying to get bills into a place where they are at least palatable for us, because changing votes and getting votes on both the House and the Senate floor to undo something that comes out of committee is really tough. Just from the job I do and the vote counting, which is really at the end of the day what I do. So just know the reason you kind of trying to get these bills in a place before they move out of committee is that extremely high hurdle of getting something changed on the floor of the House or the Senate, just from a majority standpoint. Okay, I'm going to move on to House Bill 1267, and that's the independent statewide investigation teams. Again, I know most of you have been on these Saturday calls, but just to reiterate, this was a bill that came out of the governor's reform task force that James and other law enforcement groups sat on. That recommendation out of that committee was twofold. Not only did it have a recommendation to stand up an independent investigation statewide team, but it also had as a recommendation legislation to also stand up an independent statewide prosecutor. And we feel that from a policy and from an implementation standpoint, that both the statewide independent investigation teams and an independent statewide prosecutor have to go hand in hand and attached at the hip, married from a policy standpoint, however you want to put it. And that bill, the statewide independent prosecutor was House Bill 1507. And that bill did not make it out of the policy committee, Representative Goodman's committee. So what we have is a situation where the independent investigation team legislation is moving forward, but the piece that we need to have it married to, which is the statewide prosecutor bill, hasn't happened. So, and we've indicated to the proponents and the prime sponsor that is going to be a bridge too far for us. We will totally support the independent investigation team bill 1267 as if it's adopted and signed by the governor. But as the process moves forward, we're also, opposed at a just kind of a really high level because it's not married to the statewide independent prosecutor bill. And that doesn't seem likely to happen this session. So we're going to softly oppose House Bill 1267 and just say without that marriage with the statewide independent prosecutor, it's just a piece of legislation that we can't be supportive of at this juncture. So, but having said all of that, I do expect the bill to move forward, notwithstanding our soft opposition. That independent investigation agency will be stood up likely in the governor's as an offshoot of the governor's office. And as I recall, that fiscal note on that bill to stand up that office is running about $26 million a biennium, give or take. So it's not going to be cheap, but it's definitely something that the community groups and the proponents are interested in seeing. Again, from an implementation standpoint, we think it's going to be bumpy with a statewide independent investigation team and then local prosecutors making charging decisions. But that's where we are on that bill, and we're just going to have to continue our soft opposition as it moves forward. James, you want to add anything on 1267? And before I forget, that had a public hearing this past week, and our testimony reflected that. Oh, no, I'm sorry. That bill is being heard Tuesday next week. So we'll provide that testimony in that way on that bill in Senator Peterson's committee. James, you want to add anything on 1267?
So Alan Harvey has his hand up, so I'll let him go.
Stop smirking, Marco. So on this failure to make the combination, and not failure on your part, obviously failure for this to go forward by having an independent the two-part prosecution team aspect. Can you kind of highlight it? Was that a fiscal issue? Why did that actually not make it out of Rogers' realm?
So a couple of things. That bill. So James is laughing really hard. I want him to. There was a lot, Alan. There was a lot of legal back and forth on how much and to what extent a statewide independent prosecutor could operate above the 39 county local prosecutors. And so the legality of having a statewide independent prosecutor was really part of the legal issue with that bill. Because of that, the bill was introduced late. That bill was put on Representative Goodman's committee, was referred to Representative Goodman's committee, which I'm not certain was the plan. That bill got put on an agenda with House Bill 1499, which was the possession bill. And at the end of the day, Alan, that bill, the 1499 bill got all the hoopla on that day.
Okay.
And 1507 really wasn't in a place where we liked it because it established concurrent jurisdiction with the Attorney General and the local prosecutor, which we don't like. We want the prosecutor at the statewide level to have the ability to make all the charging decisions. So that bill just had a lot going on with it, and it failed.
One last follow-up. This is from a practical standpoint. So in the last number of shootings that we've had, the prosecutors, except for Franklin County, he's not done this yet. The prosecutors are sending out, and I don't know if this is a WAPA thing, and maybe you do. They're sending out their reviews on a more regular basis to have other prosecutors look at them. In other words, in effect, trying to engage in a non-legislative fix practice where they're doing this on a regular basis. I think it's because they're going to be establishing data and a practice so that the next time this comes up, just as a heads up, that they'll be able to turn around at WAPA and say, hey, we're doing this regularly. And that's just my 2 cents for you guys.
I appreciate that and totally understand that. The WAPA, as I understand it, and I'm always careful about, putting words in folks' mouth. I understand WAPA is split on this issue. Some of their prosecuting attorneys would prefer to have a statewide independent prosecutor because they would like to, if they don't have that job to do, then the state can handle it and they can do it. There are other prosecutors who take the view and the stance that they are elected by their county voters and they are elected to make that decision. So, but Alan, I appreciate that comment. And that's exactly what will happen next time around. And we're going to be in a place to say we appreciate that. But for an independent statewide prosecutor to operate properly, it has to be in conjunction with the statewide independent investigation teams.
Thank you, guys.
Yep. Okay, data collection, House Bill 5289, that's scheduled for public hearing next Tuesday in the Public Safety Committee. We will be testifying in favor of that legislation. We've been working with the Attorney General's office and the prime sponsor to get that bill in a really good spot where a lot of data is collected. It's robust data collection, and it's to be a system for the guys. If I know Holt's on the line and somebody else from Spokane, but to really kind of mimic that dashboard that is going on right now in Spokane and other jurisdictions. It's not going to be cheap, but it's something that we very much support, and it's something that we believe helps paint a really decent picture of what you all do day in and day out, and doesn't just focus on the deadly force piece of your all's job. So we think that having this, and I think the community groups also take this stance, but maybe for a different reason. We think it's going to help, move the narrative on what peace officers and what you all do every day, to change that narrative, to really, focus on stuff other than the incidences and all the good things and the positive things that you all do every day. So as I've said on these calls before, the data will set you free. So we're really hopeful that that bill keeps moving. And right now it's set up so that the Attorney General will create an advisory group that has 3 law enforcement members on it to create an RFP or a request for proposals. That advisory group will make a recommendation to the Attorney General that really is going to be hopefully at a place where the Attorney General just accepts that recommendation of that advisory group, lock, stock, and barrel. But it does give the Attorney General the ability to change that recommendation. And then it's set up so that it's required that a university be the entity that provides the main bid on that data collection bill. So that'll keeps the transparency of the data collection moving forward. It's something that both the law enforcement community and the community groups can support. So we're going to have some work to do over the interim as that RFP process and that advisory group gets moving. But again, we think it's in a pretty decent place right now, very robust, and it's not cheap. I think the fiscal note on it right now is running about $7 million in the first biennium, and then bumps down to $5 million in the out years 3 and 4, and then bumps down a little bit more to about $4 million in years 5 and 6. But remember, the reason it's so heavy on the front end is because of all the historical data that we want law enforcement agencies to present, so that right after that historical data gets inputted into the system, there ought to be some data collection policies and pieces that can be discerned from the historical data right away. And that's important, because otherwise, if you don't go back and get that historical data and you start collecting on day one on a particular piece of data that you're going to get, you're not in a place to make any to do any discernment on the data until out years, like year 2 or 3, because you've got to you've got to load those data sets with data to make conclusions and to draw policy decisions and managerial decisions from that data. So we're really pushing to have that historical data done right away, so that we can start using those dashboards and those analyses right away. James, anything you want to add on data collection?
Nope, you hit everything I was going to. Good job.
All right. So next bill I'm going to go to is House Bill 1088, and that's the Brady bill or the impeachment bill. That bill is moving along. It was one of the bills, believe it or not, that moved out of before cutoff. So it's a House bill that has moved out of the Senate and was passed out on the cutoff day. So that bill goes back over to the House for concurrence, and then it'll be moved down to the governor's office. The bill is in a place that we're not really supportive of, because it basically requires all the local prosecutors to create Brady model policies. And, we just think that having each prosecutor develop a Brady policy to be implemented really doesn't establish any statewide standards that we are interested in from a policy perspective. The bill started out having the Washington Association of Prosecuting Attorneys develop model policies, which you all know exists today. I think their last model policies, James, correct me if I'm wrong, I think they said was put out in like 2018 and hasn't been updated, or 2017 and hasn't been updated since. So we're really concerned that this bill will require the model policy creation. But again, we're going to end up with 39 different policies. And I think we're going to be back either next year or the following year asking that some statewide policies be set by the legislature so that every prosecuting attorney has the same set of minimum standards that get applied at least as a base. And so that everybody knows the rules, and the rules are the same all around the state. So we're softly opposed to that bill for the way it came out, but I don't think there's any stopping it now. And we're just going to have to come back and change it here in a year or two, because I don't think it's going to have the effect that folks think it's going to have. Anything else on 1088, James?
I would just say it didn't go as far as we wanted to go, but at least we got our foot in the door and we got a place to work from.
Yeah, and the other thing, and that's a good point, I will mention one of the things it does have in there that again is something I would like to see in a statewide policy. It does require local prosecutors to examine under what circumstances folks can be removed from a Brady list. So at least it has that clause in it. I expect that provision to be wildly interpreted at the local level. And again, I think it's something we're going to be back examining either in the 2022 session or maybe even 2023. All right, so the next bill I'm going to talk about is the audit bill, House Bill 1089. Recall that's the bill that requires the state auditor to do a process compliance check after the completion of any use of force investigation at a local level, and after a charging decision has been made or not made by the local prosecutor. I use those words kind of carefully, process compliance check, because this isn't a second dip at seeing how the investigation went, the charging decision. What it is it's making certain that the local law enforcement agency and the prosecutor followed the processes that were established in Initiative 940, House Bill 1064 of several years ago, and the rules that were adopted under those bills by the CJTC. Recall that there was a lot of bumps along the road, and those independent investigations at the local level on bringing community members on board to be a part of the investigation team. We had a recent report from the Attorney General's office that I think examined about 30 instances. I have not, full disclosure, had an opportunity to go back and look at that report. But that report indicated that about 28-30% of the time did all the agencies follow the exact processes to the letter in that bill and those rules. So it's something that we support. We think it's a good check at the local level. There are some folks who don't think the state auditor is the appropriate place to have this process compliance audit. We think it's a reasonable place to start. For sure, that bill is had really good bipartisan support and is moving along. It requires the state auditor to contract out for those services in the front end of their process when assuming the bill gets adopted, and then the bill is intended to have them bring on competent staff after after about maybe 1 or 2 or 3 years. And it requires them to bring on non-law enforcement investigators to do these process compliance audits. So it's a bill we support. There's a section in there that we don't like that authorizes the CJTC to direct the state auditor to do an audit on a local agency if there's a complaint or complaints. We think that's too broad of an authority to vest in the CJTC. But they don't anticipate more than 1 or 2 of those being handled a year. So we're going to have to watch that process, as will WASPIC and others, to make certain that it doesn't become what I would call an open book for the Criminal Justice Training Commission to direct the state auditor to do more audits. Anything you want to add on the audit bill, James?
Nope, covered it well.
All right. I'm just going to go through a couple ones, James, that I don't know that are on the list. And one is House Bill 5055, and that's the grievance arbitration bill that moves and requires all grievance arbitrations to be moved through PERC. The bill started out having 3 PERC arbitrators to be focused on law enforcement grievance arbitrations. That number was morphed at one point in the process to 6 grievance arbitration arbitrators, and I think now the number is at 9. So it's got a decent fiscal note on it, but it's something that we support, and it's something that we hope the legislature funds. It's scheduled in executive session. We signed up in favor of the bill. We didn't provide any testimony on it. I think there was a few groups that testified on it. We just signed up in favor. That's in the House Labor and Commerce and Workforce Development Committee. I expect it to be exec'd out sometime next week. And it should move along pretty quickly through the process. It does have a fiscal impact on PERC. So that's a bill that'll be moved into the Appropriations Committee, and it'll have to, wait until then to see how much and to what extent it's funded. We talked about, do we talk about 5051, James? I'm kind of trying to go back and see.
Yep.
Okay, we talked about 5051. So I don't think Blake, we can talk about very quickly if you like. There's a difference of opinion on how much and to what extent the legislature is going to address Blake. We're supportive of the bills that have been introduced that add the word knowingly to state law, which will take care of the possession decision in Blake. And it's going to be interesting to see what the legislature does with that. And I think the House and the Senate are in different places in terms of addressing the Blake decision. There are 2 bills that have been introduced on the Senate side to address the knowingly piece. That's the one bill on the House side is House Bill 1499. That bill has 2 pieces in it. It has the possession, basically the decriminalization portion of it. Then it has making more robust the treatment side of it, or the substance use and behavioral health side. So I think there's on the House side, I think there's a willingness just to address the treatment side of it without the decriminalization side of it. And then on the Senate side, I think there's a willingness to address both. So we'll stay engaged as we go through. go through that and see how the legislature ends up deciding to address the issue. So with that, I am always amazed at how close we get to 10 to 11 o'clock, James. I'll shut up and see if there's any closing remarks for anybody.
So let's just, in the interest of time, let's just go around the room and we'll start with Marco and we'll go from there.
Oh, thanks, James. So, obviously, we hold these meetings so everybody can be engaged on what we're doing in the legislature. I can tell you from a Washington State FOP standpoint, when we work collaboratively with not only our community partners, but legislators to try to move that needle to the middle and try to make sure we come up with solution-oriented decisions, we have shown that we can work together. And there are some bills that we can support. And when we come out in the media that we can support those things, it is our duty to also continue to testify that way unless there's drastic changes. But we definitely appreciate, the legislators and community groups to continue to want to be engaged and create good policy. And many of these are to that level. Some we can't get there, but others we can. And so we will always take that approach. It's about working together and making sure that we address the needs of the community, but also still allow for us to give us the tools to do our job safely and effectively. So I do appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, Jeff, Leah.
No, we're good. Thank you, sir. Marco took it all.
Hey, Daniel, thanks for attending today for your first time. You got anything else you'd like to ask or add?
No, nothing. Thank you very much for having me on. Hopefully I'll get more involved with everything going on and join you guys.
Brother Banner, you got anything you want to add?
Nope. Thanks, guys, for your hard work.
Brother Chad, you got anything you want to add?
All good. Echo everybody else. Thanks for all the hard work.
Brother Jack, you got anything you want to add?
Nope, I'm good. Thank you. Good job.
Holt, you got anything you want to add?
Good to go. Busy time.
Yep. I got, I'm going to save Rob for last because he likes to send us out. I just want to say I appreciate everybody attending today. I appreciate everybody being engaged. I also want to recognize we had 2 state board members watching on Facebook. My counterpart on the east side, Bill Spillon, and the Sergeant at Arms, Jared Couch. So I appreciate everybody's attendance on Facebook. This will be up on YouTube in about an hour. So for those that can't, and so those of you that are going to watch during the week, if you guys want to get involved legislatively, please email me. You're more than welcome. This is a member-driven organization, and we receive our support from you guys, and we want to hear your perspective. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to
James.
Rob Hyman. Go ahead,
James,
Alan.
I'm sorry.
Alan, I'm going to have to charge you billable a minute here, but go ahead.
Okay, I apologize. I was looking at the list and Michael said he didn't have it in front of him. And there was one thing, House Bill 1202. Did that get covered or did I?
Yeah, you missed it, Alan. 1202
Okay.
did not make the cutoff. It is no longer moving forward this legislative session. It will come back next legislative session, but we've committed to working with the prime sponsor to try to work something out.
Copy that. Thank you.
Yep. Okay, Rob, take us out, buddy.
All right. Thanks, everybody. And the amount of work that these guys are putting in every day in Olympia is a lot. And it's not that that's their full-time job other than Mr. Transu, although I don't think we're the only group he advocates for. But these guys are working their regular job and going up there in the evenings and advocating for you guys. So I want to thank you guys for your hard work. And one other thing I want to say is the OIS training the other night was phenomenal. And I know that the plan is possibly to have the attorneys come on again and do some more of that. So look forward to that stuff coming. And thanks everybody for tuning in.
And thank you all. Thank you all for your service. Greatly appreciated, and appreciate you all being peace officers.
See you, everybody.